My name is Katrina Evans. And the day my sister's husband yelled at me to leave my own beach house, the one I built, paid for, and poured my soul into, something inside me changed forever. It was a quiet morning on the Oregon coast, the kind where the sea mist clings to the glass doors, and the sound of waves feels almost holy. I had come here to escape the noise of the city, to write, to breathe again. This house was my safe place, a reflection of every storm I'd survived. I never imagined it would become the stage for betrayal. I still remember his voice echoing through the living room, cold, commanding, as if I were an uninvited guest. Katrina, maybe it's best if you just go. This isn't your space anymore. My sister, Emma, stood beside him silent. Her eyes darted away when I looked at her, as if the truth might spill out if she met my gaze. That silence hurt more than his words ever could. I didn't argue. I just nodded slowly, took my bag, and walked toward the porch. The sea breeze hit my face, sharp and stinging, but not as much as the realization that I had just been erased from a place that was mine. People say family wounds cut the deepest. I used to think that was a cliché until that morning. I didn't yell back. I didn't cry. I just stood there, watching my sister's husband lock the door behind me like I was a stranger. And in that moment I promised myself, this wasn't the end of my story. Not even close. That beach house held more than furniture and memories. It held secrets. And I was about to uncover every single one of them piece by piece. Because when someone pushes you out of what's yours, you don't disappear. You learn. You plan. And one day you walk back in on your own terms. Before everything fell apart, my life felt simple, almost golden. I was the older sister, the responsible one, the planner, the dreamer who somehow made things happen. My sister Emma was the heart of every room. Where I was steady, she was soft. Where I hesitated, she leaped. We balanced each other like sunlight and shadow. Our parents passed away when we were still in college, and from then on it was just us. I took 2 jobs to keep us afloat, teaching art during the day and freelancing at night, while Emma chased her degree in marketing. Every small victory we had felt shared. When she got her first job, she bought me a silver bracelet that said, "Always sisters." I wore it every day for years. Back then we used to sit by the beach, drinking cheap coffee from paper cups, dreaming about owning a place there someday. I'd sketch floor plans in my notebook while she named imaginary rooms, the reading nook, the music corner, the guest room with a sea view. We laughed, believing those dreams would always belong to both of us. Then came him, Ethan. He walked into our lives at one of Emma's office parties, charming, confident, a little too polished but undeniably magnetic. I remember thinking he looked like someone who had never known failure, the kind of man who smiled with purpose. Emma was smitten from day one. I could see it in the way she straightened her hair before their second date, the way she glowed when she talked about him. And honestly, I was happy for her. She deserved someone who made her feel seen. When they got engaged, I was the maid of honor, of course. I threw myself into planning the wedding. Flowers, venue, playlist, every detail perfect. Ethan treated me kindly then, or at least it seemed that way. He'd call me Kat and ask about my art, my projects, my travel plans. He even suggested I invest in a property, saying it would set me free. Looking back now, it's almost ironic. I found the beach house a year later, an old cedar cottage just outside Cannon Beach. It was run down, but the moment I stepped inside and heard the ocean hum through cracked windows, I knew it was the one. I spent months restoring it, painting the walls, sanding floors, choosing sea glass colors and soft linen curtains. Emma and Ethan visited every other weekend. We'd cook dinner, play board games, and sit around the fire pit talking about life. For a while, it felt like family again. But slowly, something shifted. Ethan started making decisions that included my sister and excluded me. He'd changed the topic when I talked about renovations or bills. Emma stopped coming alone. She said Ethan wanted to spend more time by the coast, which I tried to take as affection, not control. Still, little things piled up. My spare key went missing one weekend. The silver bracelet Emma gave me wasn't on her wrist anymore. And one night, I came home to find a bottle of expensive wine I didn't buy, half empty on my kitchen counter. I brushed it off as confusion, maybe even fatigue. I wanted to believe nothing was wrong. But then came the first lie. It was about money. I had paid the property taxes online, but when I mentioned it, Ethan frowned and said he'd already handled it weeks ago. I showed him the receipt. He laughed it off, saying he must have forgotten. The moment was small, but it left a mark, like the first crack in a perfect mirror. Over time, Emma's calls became shorter. Our inside jokes faded into polite updates. She started saying things like, "Ethan thinks you should rent the place out when you're not here," or, "Maybe we could help manage it for you." I didn't understand why they suddenly had opinions on my home. Still, I stayed calm. I didn't want conflict. I kept telling myself love changes people. Maybe marriage just made her busier, maybe Ethan meant well. But one afternoon, something small, something trivial, changed everything. I had driven down to the beach house unannounced after a long week, hoping to surprise them with dinner. The lights were on, the sound of music floated out through the open window. A song I hadn't heard in years, our song, the one Emma and I used to dance to while painting walls. For a moment, my heart lifted. Then I saw it. Through the window, Ethan was sitting at my desk, my personal writing desk, the one I kept locked, flipping through my notebooks. And Emma was standing beside him, whispering something I couldn't hear, her hand resting on his shoulder like they were guarding a secret. They didn't see me. I stood there for a long minute, watching the two people I loved most look at something that belonged only to me. My journals weren't about money or art. They were filled with personal letters, raw thoughts, pieces of my heart no one else had read. That night, I didn't knock. I quietly walked back to my car and drove away, pretending nothing happened. But inside me, something began to turn. Something sharp, clear, and quietly dangerous. It happened on a gray, rain-soaked evening, the kind where the world feels quieter than usual, like it's holding its breath. I was sitting at my small apartment desk in Portland, staring at the flickering cursor on my laptop. The rain drummed softly against the window, a rhythm steady enough to calm me, until my email notification chimed. It was from my lawyer. Subject line: Ownership Inquiry, Beach Property. For a second I thought it was a mistake. I hadn't asked for any inquiry. My heart started to pound as I clicked it open. Inside was a polite, professional message. Katrina, as requested by Mr. and Mrs. Ethan and Emma Cole, I've forwarded the updated title documents for verification. Please confirm the receipt. I froze. My breath caught halfway in my chest. Mr. and Mrs. Ethan and Emma Cole. My sister's name. My brother-in-law's. My house. Attached were scanned papers, the kind that looked official with stamps and signatures. At the bottom of one page I saw my own name crossed out. Next to it, Emma Cole. I didn't speak. Didn't move. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too heavy. I could hear the faint hum of my refrigerator, the rain, my pulse. That was it. First I thought, this can't be real. Maybe a clerical error. Maybe someone sent the wrong file. But then I saw the date on the document last week. And the signatures. Ethan's bold, self-assured scrawl. Emma's careful cursive. Together side by side. I stared at the screen for so long the light began to hurt my eyes. Every memory replayed in fragments. Emma laughing beside me while painting those same walls. Ethan telling me how lucky I was to own such a place. The way they'd started staying longer, acting like hosts. And then his voice. This isn't your space anymore. The betrayal didn't hit like a scream. It hit like silence. Cold, sharp, endless. I picked up my phone and scrolled through our family group chat. Messages from weeks ago. Emma talking about fixing up the house paperwork, saying Ethan was helping with taxes. I'd brushed it off then, trusting her completely. I scrolled further. Photos of them at the beach house posted while I was out of town. Smiling. Toasting wine. My fireplace is glowing behind them. It wasn't just betrayal. It was erased. The next morning I drove down to the coast. The rain hadn't stopped. The ocean was rough, loud, alive, and yet I felt nothing. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. When I reached the cottage, I didn't even step out of the car. The curtains were closed, but I could see light through the cracks. I knew they were inside. I watched for a long time until I saw Ethan walk past the window with a mug in his hand, wearing my old sweatshirt, the one I used to wear on winter nights by the fire. And then I saw Emma, my sister, smiling as she adjusted the frame above the fireplace. It wasn't the photo I had hung there. It was their wedding picture. I don't remember starting to cry. But I do remember the taste of salt, from my tears or the ocean air, I'm not sure. Everything blurred, except for one thing. I understood now. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. They had taken what was mine, and they had planned it. That night, I sat in my car by the shore for hours, the rain tapping softly against the windshield. I didn't call anyone. I didn't scream. I just stared at the dark horizon until the storm faded into a thin mist. People think betrayal makes you burn with rage. But for me, it was the opposite. It froze me, quiet, measured, focused. And in that cold stillness, a thought formed, clear as glass. I wouldn't fight back in anger. I'd wait. Because anger is loud. But patience is silent, and far more dangerous. The first rule of revenge, if you want it to mean something, is patience. I learned that in silence, sitting alone in my apartment while the ocean wind whispered outside my window like an old secret. After the discovery, the initial shock had burned out. What remained was something colder, clarity. I didn't want to destroy them impulsively. I wanted to understand how they had done it, how they had turned my name into theirs. So I started where it all began, the papers. I met with my lawyer, David, under the pretense of routine maintenance for the property file. He'd known me for years and trusted me, but even he looked uneasy when I mentioned Ethan's name. I watched his expression carefully as he opened his folder. There were several transfers, he said. Your sister and her husband filed new partnership documents, with your electronic signature. Electronic signature. My throat tightened. I'd never authorized anything like that. David leaned back, lowering his voice. Katrina, it's not just property. There's a shared financial account linked to the beach house now. Someone used your tax ID. That's when I knew this wasn't just betrayal. It was theft. When I got home that night, I made tea and opened my laptop, letting the screen's glow spill across the dark room. I logged into my bank, my insurance, my email, one by one. Some passwords didn't work. Others showed recent activity from locations I didn't recognize. I reset everything. Then I set up alerts, every login, every change, every transaction. The next step was to gather proof quietly. I bought a small audio recorder, one of those pen-sized ones, and slipped it inside an old photo frame in the beach house living room during one of their weekend trips. They didn't even notice I'd come by. Ethan had given me a fake smile at the door, pretending to be civil, pretending the house was ours. But I left the recorder running before I left. A week later, I retrieved it. I listened late that night in my apartment, rain tapping against the glass. Their voices filled the room through static. Emma's soft tone, Ethan's low and controlled. We should move the money before she finds out, Ethan said. She trusts me, Emma whispered. She won't question anything. Good. Keep it that way. I sat in the dark, frozen. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was strategy. And I realized they'd underestimated me completely. So I began my own strategy. First, I found an ally, someone who hated Ethan almost as much as I now did. His former business partner, a man named Chris. We met at a coffee shop near downtown. Chris told me Ethan had burned him in a failed real estate investment. Falsified records, broken promises. He's charming until you're no longer useful, he said, stirring his coffee. Then he takes what's yours. We compared notes. Ethan's handwriting. His digital habits. The way he used people's trust as leverage. It was all the same pattern. Next, I hired a private investigator quietly using my freelance account. Her name was Leah. Calm, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who didn't flinch at ugly truths. She traced Ethan's financial footprint. Offshore transfers, fake consulting payments, hidden emails linked to Emma's laptop. Every piece of evidence she found I kept in a single encrypted folder. I named it Tides. And I waited. I kept visiting the beach house occasionally, acting calm, even warm. Emma would hug me too tightly. Ethan would pretend nothing was wrong. Once I noticed my art pieces were replaced with generic coastal prints. My books were gone. Every trace of me is erased. But they didn't know I was watching. They didn't know I had installed a motion camera under the eaves of the porch. Or that every conversation near the fireplace, their favorite spot, was being recorded through a hidden mic behind the frame. Over weeks, I collected everything. A voicemail of Ethan bragging about how easy it was to sign for her. Screenshots of their emails planning the transfer. Bank statements showing withdrawals from the shared account. Every piece went into the Tides folder. Every night, I'd back it up twice, one on my drive, one on cloud storage Ethan didn't know existed. Still, I kept my tone steady around them. Smiling, polite, even forgiving. I let them believe they had won. That I was broken. That I'd moved on. One evening Emma texted me, "Ethan and I are thinking of renting the house this summer. You should come stay one last weekend before we start." I stared at that message for a long moment. One last weekend. That was all I needed, a stage. I sent back a simple reply. Sure. I'd love to. Then I turned off my phone and looked out the window, the sea stretching into darkness. They thought the storm had passed. But they had no idea what was coming. The day I returned to the beach house for that one last weekend, the sky was a deep gray, the kind that feels heavy with meaning. The wind carried salt and memory. Every wave that hit the shore felt like an echo from the past, whispering, "Not yet. Not until it's done." I arrived before sunset. The house looked perfect from the outside, freshly painted shutters, flowers by the porch. It almost fooled me into thinking nothing had happened. But inside, I could already feel the lie in the air, polished, perfumed, hollow. Emma and Ethan greeted me with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Emma hugged me tightly, whispering, "I'm so glad you came." Ethan stood behind her, his hand firm on her shoulder like a silent claim. Dinner was awkwardly normal. We talked about work, the weather, and how the ocean had been calm that week. But under the table, I could see Ethan's phone lighting up again, and again with unknown numbers. I knew what those were, potential renters, realtors. They were ready to list my house. After dinner, Emma poured wine. Ethan lit the fireplace. The three of us sat around it like ghosts playing family. That's when I placed my small silver recorder on the table, the same one I had used weeks ago, and smiled. "You remember this?" I asked. "You both once said it made my voice sound cinematic." Ethan chuckled. "Still playing detective, Katrina?" "Maybe," I said softly. "Or maybe I just like keeping records." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then I leaned forward and pressed play. Their voices, recorded from the house weeks ago, filled the air. Ethan's arrogant tone. "Move the money before she finds out." Emma's whisper. "She trusts me. She won't question anything." The color drained from Emma's face. Ethan went rigid, his jaw clenching. The fire crackled between us. The sound suddenly too loud. "I don't understand," Emma stammered. "Katrina, it's not." "Save it," I said quietly. My voice didn't shake. "I know everything. The fake signatures. The bank transfers. The lies. I have it all. Record it, document it, time-stamped." Ethan's voice turned cold. "You think anyone will believe you? The deed's in our name now." I smiled faintly. "Not for long." That's when the knock came at the door. 3 short raps, firm, deliberate. Ethan's confidence faltered. He looked toward the sound, then back at me. Outside stood 2 officers and David, my lawyer. David's expression was grim but satisfied. "Ethan Cole," he said, stepping in. "You're under investigation for fraud and forgery. We have recorded evidence of your involvement in multiple document alterations and identity misuse." Emma gasped. Ethan tried to speak, to charm, to twist, to control, but his words fell apart as the officers began reading his rights. The sound of metal cuffs clicking echoed through the living room, quiet, precise, final. Emma didn't move. She just stood there, tears pooling in her eyes, her hands trembling. I looked at her, my sister, and for a moment, all the anger I'd held began to soften into something else. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. "Why?" I whispered. "You could have asked me for anything. Why take it this way?" She looked at me, her voice breaking. "Because you had everything, Katrina. The house, the freedom, the peace. I just wanted to feel like I belonged to something too." It was the kind of answer that hurt worse than a lie, because it was true in its own broken way. The police led Ethan outside. The night air was cold, and the sound of the waves mixed with the static of the radio. The lights from their car reflected across the windows, flashing red and blue over the walls we once painted together. I stood in the doorway, watching as Ethan was driven away, his face hidden in shadow. Emma sat silently by the fire, staring at the floor. David turned to me. The property is yours again. Once the court finalizes everything, you'll have full ownership restored. You did everything by the book, Katrina. Smart move. I nodded slowly. That was the plan. When everyone finally left, the house fell quiet again. Just the sea and me. I walked through each room, touching the walls, the furniture, the frames. Everything smelled faintly of salt and betrayal, but also of closure. In the study, I found the wedding photo still hanging above the fireplace. I took it down gently, set it on the table, and replaced it with an older picture. Me and Emma, laughing in the sunlight years ago, before Ethan, before everything. As I stood there, the house didn't feel stolen anymore. Felt reclaimed. I knew Emma would have to face her own justice. Not the kind written in law, but the kind that lives inside guilt and silence. And maybe someday when she's ready to say sorry, I'll be ready to listen. But not tonight. Tonight was for peace. The fire crackled softly behind me. Outside, the ocean breathed steady, endless. I walked to the porch, the same one I'd once been forced to leave, and let the cold wind brush against my face. For the first time in months I smiled. They had no idea what was coming. The weeks that followed felt like standing after a long storm. The world still damp, quiet, but strangely bright. Ethan's case went public soon after. Fraud. Forgery. Property theft. His name filled headlines for a few days, then disappeared like foam into the tide. The court restored the deed in my name, and for the first time, my beach house was legally and emotionally mine again. No shadows left inside it. Emma moved away, not far, just inland, to stay with an aunt. She sent me a letter once. Not an apology exactly, but something softer. She wrote, "I see now what I broke wasn't just trust. It was our history." I read it twice, then folded it and placed it inside my journal. I didn't reply, but I didn't throw it away either. Some wounds need time, not words. I started painting again. The living room became my studio. Sunlight spilling across canvases, sea air filling every breath. The walls that once echoed with lies now carried music again. I learned to love silence not as emptiness but as peace earned. Sometimes I walk down to the shore at sunset and think about everything that happened, the betrayal, the planning, the justice. And though people expect revenge to leave you triumphant, the truth is, it just leaves you quieter. Because in the end, I didn't win by hurting them. I won by staying calm, staying patient, and letting the truth speak for itself. I learned that justice isn't about fire. It's about light. And the brightest kind of light comes after darkness so deep, it almost convinces you you'll never see morning again. One evening I stood on the porch, watching the horizon fade from gold to silver. The sea moved endlessly before me, the same sea that had witnessed everything. I whispered to it, half to myself, sometimes the best revenge is simply reclaiming your peace. And for the first time I truly believed it. If you enjoyed this story, a tale of quiet strength, healing, and poetic justice, don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep emotional stories.